Mike Maples Jr. is the co-founder of the venture capital firm Floodgate. He's written a new book, Pattern Breakers, Why Some Startups Change the Future. And let me say, I was just telling Scott a second ago, you're one of my favorite people to talk to because you're so smart. You've always given me good insights. And although at the same time, with many VCs, it's a low bar. But I've always appreciated your insights. It was always different and unusual. So let's just get into it. Just for people who don't know, you were an early investor. You've always been a very early investor in Twitter, when it was Odeo, Twitch, Lyft, and many others. What exactly defines a founder or company as a pattern breaker? I mean, that's why'd you call your book Pattern Breakers?
Now, I'll give an example that's not even in the startup realm, but it would be a pattern breaking example of recent times: the Tesla Cybertruck. Now, you may like it, you may dislike it. When I saw it announced, I thought he might be joking, right? Like I was like, is he really going to ship that thing? But nobody, when they see a Cybertruck, ever says, well, so how does that compare to an F-150? So Elon kind of says, live in my future or don't, but you have to choose. So pattern breaker is, the idea was that we tend to operate according to consistent patterns, and that's actually not a bad thing. That helped us avoid saber-toothed tigers, or it helps us fit in socially in communities and stuff. But pattern matching creates a bias as well. It causes you to not see other opportunities.
This is a quote from you: "The right amount of disagreeableness can be a founder's ally in developing breakthrough ideas." Now, at the same time, it can lead to toxicity. You mentioned Elon; yes. He was very disagreeable, but it's morphed into toxicity now, right? In a way that's everything is disagreeable, right? Talk about that balance, because I agree with you. I think I'm a disagreeable person. I think that's one of the reasons I'm successful, because I disagree. No, but I'm like, I want to do podcasts now. 10 years ago, this is what even though, and a lot of people said no.
Don't say anything. Don't say anything.
Shush. But we talk about this disagreeableness, and when it becomes kind of, I was right before, and you'll see that I'm right again, because it's not always the case, for sure.
Yeah, so I'm going to tread carefully on this question because
okay.
I'm a little bit more positive on Elon than you might be.
Yes, I know that.
So like the way
you're a VC looking for his next deal. What VC out there with a fund open is critical of Elon Musk?
Okay, well let me.
Anyways,
so I haven't invested in this company.
I'm sure your fondness for him is genuine. Anyways, go ahead.
So let me just kind of describe. Like, one of the things that I try to do, and there are trade-offs to it, is I try to keep my tribal affiliations small. So because like Elon contains multitudes.
Sure does.
And like if you look at NASA versus SpaceX, mm-hmm. to launch a kilogram, mm-hmm. SpaceX can do it for a 20th of the price.
Yeah.
Right. And so I say, okay, I'm pretty interested in that. Right, like I'm glad that part of him exists in the world. And then when I look at when I look at what he's done, to enable Starlink over the Ukraine, and so there's things about him I wouldn't do those things, but I try to kind of separate the things that he does that are really positive, and not try to like paint him with one single negative or positive brush. I think that people are just complicated. And especially people who change the future. And so I'm a little bit more sympathetic to him than you might be. I mean, I understand your
complicated means having 12 kids and living with none of them and demonizing trans kids.
We get why you're doing it.
He's complex.
Yeah, but like what I'm saying is, like,
he doesn't care about
I'm not just a shill for Elon, right? I haven't invested in his startups. I'm not like I'm not trying to say I'm not trying to be tribal about it, right?
Mike, you have a very calm attitude. Mark Benioff has the same one. Here's the only thing I would say about the cutting prices. He was allowed to blow up rockets. NASA isn't. So he can be more disagreeable and risk-taking than, you know what I mean? It's very easy to figure out the way to do it if you're allowed to blow things up.
And so I think, and by the way, I think that's good. I think we need more of that, right? So...
But NASA can't. So attacking NASA actually can't blow things up.
But I'm not attacking him. I'm just saying a pattern breaker changes the future.
You're acknowledging the truth. He can put shit into space for less money than anyone else. It's incredible.
And I'm saying that all things being equal, I like it. And so the thing that Elon brings that I think we need in an ingredient in this recipe is he builds things, right? Like when he says he's going to blast rockets into outer space, he does. And when he says he's going to make an electric car work that's interesting and awesome, he does. And I got a lot of time for people like that in this society.
Let me ask you, I'm going to switch you from this just for a minute, but there's so many AI startups now. We just talked about what was going on at OpenAI, and we thought losing money, all the mishigas, it doesn't matter. This is a world-changing company, right? It's been doing astonishing things. Ultimately, it probably will settle itself out. But what would get you to invest in one, and what are you interested in, especially considering all the competition now? There is a lot of OpenAI, Google, Microsoft, Anthropic, it goes on and on and on.
Yeah, I haven't done a whole lot of AI investing.
Right.
No, right. It's so we've had a couple of ones that have been good. So Applied Intuition is a company that helps with autonomous vehicles and EVs, but it's enterprise software, really large contracts. And then I invested in Trip Adler's new company, the guy from Scribd. It's called Created by Humans, and it's trying to let creators create licensing deals with the LLM companies. OpenAI is really not my kind of investment. I mean, I wish them very well, along with Anthropic and all these other guys. But my business is hard but not complicated. I'm wrong 85% of the time. And when I'm right,
Airbnb, correct?
Yeah. When I'm right, I have to be spectacularly right. And so I'm really good if 5% of my investments I make 100x on the first check, and another 10% or so I make more than 20x on the first check. I don't see a path to doing that investing in OpenAI right now, or XAI.
Well, it's not a
or any of
venture
these guys.
investment. You're a venture investor. It's no longer a venture investment, right?
Exactly. And by the way, a lot of people who call themselves venture investors in today's world are unrecognizable to me.
I just mentioned Airbnb. You had talked about it, that you passed on this.
Stupidly.
Talk about why you did that, and what do you look for when you make those misses? Like, how do you, as an investor, everyone's going to, like, I can think of a dozen different people who missed, whether it's Instagram or whatever.
Yeah. So first of all, it's helpful to just consider the backdrop that these startups are wild in the early days. Like, people talk about startups the wrong way. It's like trying to spot a beaked finch in the Galapagos Islands with a super long beak that has an adaptive advantage that allows it to survive in a new way, but like you've never seen one before. But it's wild, right? It's like a mutation. So with Airbnb, the prior week we'd been pitched by a company called Mojo Mix that lets you pick cereal online and it'll assemble it and ship you in a box. And my partner, Ann, said, "This is dumb. Why are we talking to these people? This isn't even what we invest in." And I was like, okay, that's fair. I tend to be the optimist. Ann tends to be the skeptic, when we look at this stuff. So then a week later, we go into a conference room. It's Air Bed and Breakfast. This is a year before they'd applied to YC. And Ann looks at me, all these cereal boxes, like, what the hell? Another cereal company. And I kind of look back at her like, no, it's Air Bed and Breakfast. I don't know what's this cereal about. So I ask him, and he says, we're funding the company by selling cereal boxes. And so I was like, okay, so it's Obama O's and Captain McCain Crunch. And then I say, okay, well, what does Air Bed and Breakfast do? And he says, well, our advisor says that you like demos and not slides. I said, that's right. So he fires up the product, and he can't get it to work. And so I'm like, okay, that's cool. Let's just go to the slides. He's like, well, I didn't bring any. So we're like 20 minutes into this meeting full of cereal boxes in a conference room, and I still have no idea what Air Bed and Breakfast does. We're just kind of looking at each other in this room. And so, but, I knew even at the time that he had this certain X factor, but I let myself get preoccupied. I thought somebody's going to get murdered in one of these things. Because, at the time, it was barely more than a WordPress site. You invite a guest to your house or apartment, and then you serve them Pop-Tarts the next morning. They sleep on an air mattress. And I was just like, this is just crazy, and fortunately, because Ann and I had stupidly passed on this company, when Lyft says, hey, we're going to do this ride sharing thing, and people are like, are strangers going to want to get in a stranger's car? Ann and I are like, hey, we'll take a walk on that wild side. I can see it happening. Right. So, but with Airbnb, it was just such a discombobulated meeting, and the idea was so crazy, and you had couchsurfing.com, which was free, and it was going nowhere. And I just wasn't awake enough. My mind was not open and awake enough to the possibility of what it could be.
Right.
And
as a venture, you have to do that. You have to sort of suspend.
I told myself I'm going to learn as much as I can from that mistake and never repeat that mistake. Because In corporate capitalism, Buffett would say, rule number one, don't lose money. Rule number two, don't forget rule number one. In my business, rule number one is don't pass on Airbnb, because I would have made 6,000 times my money if I'd say I could have made no good investment the rest of my entire career. It's still been really good. So I spent a lot of time really understanding what I got wrong. And another good lesson in that is quite often the best seed opportunities don't present well. And it's incumbent on you to be awake to what it could be, rather than, oh, the entrepreneur didn't present well, I'm out.
Right, which often
important.
happens.
Maybe more often than not.
Mike, thank you so much. What a thoughtful discussion. Thank you. And again, the book is Pattern Breakers: Why Some Startups Change the Future.